Hello, and welcome to episode number 138 of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Today, I conduct a conversation with a Danish conductor who started out as a professional percussionist, but from the age of 27 onwards, he concentrated on becoming a conductor. He's held title positions in Norway and the United Kingdom, including in Glasgow, where he is currently music director of the Royal Scottish National Orchestra. And earlier this year, he started as music director of the Minnesota Orchestra in the United States. It's a very great pleasure to welcome Thomas Søndergård. Thomas, it is very, very nice to see you today down the camera lens of Zoom. How are you?
I'm very well, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you. We were chatting beforehand. We think it's about 15 years ago, but I distinctly remember playing for you in my previous life as a violinist in Birmingham. And I remember it very well.
I loved it. I can tell you, I had such a great time in Birmingham, both in the hall and with the orchestra. I felt I connected really well, and I loved the weeks there. And actually, it was in Birmingham that I got a telephone call from my manager asking, and this is really fun, within the same hour, if I could step in for a conductor in Wales.
Mm.
And then an hour later, the phone rang again, and if I could step in for another conductor with the RSNO in Scotland. And the rest is history. I mean, I've been principal conductor and now music director of the RSNO, so I connected with them. But that was actually in Birmingham that the phone rang.
It's like you've read my notebook, Thomas. I've even written down about the two jump-ins. I never realised it happened on the same day. That's extraordinary. I mean, I'm going to come back to those jump-ins and relationships with orchestras later on, but that is extraordinary. I didn't know that story.
It is.
Yeah. Well, talking of stories, let's go all the way back to the beginning, as I always do. And I do my homework, and the earliest I can find is that you studied percussion, which I knew, at the Royal Danish Academy between 1989 and 1992. But did you come from a musical family, and was percussion the first thing you played, or did you start out on piano or singing or something else?
Michael, I was so lucky that I grew up in the city of I would say the cultural capital of Jutland, Søndergård, a city not far from the coast that faces Great Britain. And in the 60s there, they worked very hard on getting this city the most interesting city for anyone to move to. So they allowed an Italian actor to open his own company there, which became one of the most amazing experiences I had as a kid. And I remember it as it was yesterday. The music school was there and still is there. They were very focused on decorating the city, even if we're just talking 30,000 inhabitants at this point with art. So they actually have a Giacometti. They're very, very proud of that. They bought that at a very early stage because they were very interested. Electronic music in Scandinavia was the place. And of course, they built an enormous library, which was my second home. And this was where I went and listened to music and had board scores to come home with. So there was a marching band one day that I heard, and I said immediately to my parents, I actually went off. I ran off so they couldn't find me. They were so scared. But I stood and looked at this marching band, and I said to my mother and father, I wanted to be a part of that. Within very few weeks, I was in the music school. My uncle played trombone. He showed me in the weekend at my grandmother's, I remember that very clearly, how to do a drum roll. And he said, would you like just to try and play the drums? Anything. I just be part of that music. Came into the music school, got into the academy in Copenhagen, left school actually. I didn't finish my school because I was so occupied about just getting started with the music. Within 1 year, I saw a poster of the European Community Youth Orchestra that I then was so lucky to be part of. And literally within 3 years, I was so occupied about music. Everything that I've been looking for in my teenagers years became real. You know, I I got a job in the Royal Danish Orchestra at the opera there, and as I said, traveled with the European Union, as it's called now, youth orchestra, and that was the seed to. I was really sure that music would be my life.
And were you a percussionist in the broadest sense, or were you focusing on being a timpanist at all? I don't really know whether I remember whether you were one or the other.
I've covered it all. Actually, at some point when I actually started thinking about conducting a little bit, I wanted to do both things in Freiburg in Germany and also learn German. I always liked the German language, so I thought I could do all three things. I could actually, this teacher could teach me more about the timpani, which there was a free job at the opera. So I thought maybe I would go for that, but I need to find a teacher for that. And he was also teaching conducting. And then I would learn some German. So I went down there for half a year, and my German was really good. I got a job as a timpani player, but he was actually not very present so he could teach me any conducting. So I had none of that, but that was also the only thing actually that was missed out on that journey.
We're going to go to conducting soon, sort of via the route of being a professional musician at the Royal Danish Orchestra. And also, let's face it, with the EUYO, as it's now called, or ECYO as it was then, you would have encountered many great conductors, I'm sure. Before we get into how you decided to change from poacher to gamekeeper, as they call it, from an orchestral musician to being a conductor, which, a journey I've myself taken. What do you remember back of those days? Who conducted you, the seminal moments, important moments where you realized that actually these are great conductors. And, are there things that you rely on now that you remember being subliminally taught by those people in those days?
Yeah, first of all, I would actually say that the main thing that I discovered was how different it could be between an orchestra and a conductor. And it would matter not only on the conductor. So therefore, I can tell you wonderful names that I work with, but I'm also very aware that the circumstances are very, very different. So for my job at the opera, where we had wonderful conductors, also for ballet, we also had not so wonderful conductors. And we also did not play very well all the time. So it's not just the conductors. I actually got into the committee of the orchestra for the same reason, because I wanted to verbalize the whole fact, which I'm sure you've listened to all your life as well, that it's finding the right balance of where should the discussion begin? Should we start from a different level whenever whoever steps into on the podium? So that compared to a youth orchestra that gets a chance in their lifetime, and they're aware of that, as we did in the EUYO, and they were also aware that they were picked out of many thousands to get the chance to play with. Yes, I was fortunate to play with Giulini, Subin Mehta, Heiting, Claudio Abbado, Rostropovich, just to mention some of them. And of course, they inspired me by their personality, by their incredible music making. And not least what happened with this youth orchestra and their love to their different kind of work. The conductors' love to the youth energy. Not least, I remember Heiting getting up on the podium and being so surprised about this young energy and so overwhelmed. So he started nearly crying when he said, "I'm so happy to be back here, but I'm not a man of many words, so can we just please start making music?" To probably also, that I realize now, to Abbado, that maybe at some points in his life, he's been very interested. I mean, after all, he was the guy that started. He was the
That's
conductor
right.
this orchestra, and also both Chamber Orchestra of Europe and Mahler Chamber Orchestra. So there was something in that youth that he appreciated and loved. And I'm not saying that he was struggling with settled orchestra or anything, but it's just a different energy.
Mm.
And the experience, of course, not to mention that. But it was incredibly worthwhile for me to learn about different levels where you can take things from, if I can put it that way.
Mm.
This youth orchestra had 2 weeks of sectionals, so they sounded amazing from rehearsal. That's not the way, as you know, that's not the way a professional orchestra works. They are quick in different ways, and come to the table with different things, with the experience and not least sound. I would say a much more gathered sound, where these young people from all over Europe would come from very different schools, not least the strings.
Yeah, absolutely true. I mean, there is that difference. It is the creme de la creme of Europe who are chosen, handpicked, but they're put in a situation which is very unlike what, even in Germany, where they have more rehearsal than we do in the UK, but it's nothing like as much as 2 weeks, to make sure that they sound unified. But I suppose it's needed, as you said. There is a different approach in the type of string playing schools from across Europe. But yeah, it is totally different to what you would expect in the profession. It's interesting you went on an artistic committee when you were working as a pro. I did much the same around the time I started conducting. But I was in charge of collating the forms, whereas in the old days where you would write down what you thought of that week's guest conductor.
Yeah.
And it was before the days of doing it online and all of that. So that you would actually fill out a form, and I was in charge of collating them. And me and the other two committee members would sit with Stephen Maddock, and the chief executive, and we'd tell him what we thought, and I mean, I had to stop doing that because eventually I became one of the people who was being assessed. So I had to leave the committee. Felt a little bit wrong.
But Michael, if you prepared well for this meeting, why didn't you actually bring this one about me to this?
It was a long time ago. I would imagine they've been incinerated or whatever since then.
Yes.
No, I mean, what's interesting is what you said about, sometimes the orchestra would play well, but with a bad conductor. Sometimes they would not play so well with a good conductor.
Yeah.
Now, Sakurama once said to me, there are times I've conducted the orchestra far better than they've played, but there have been times they've played far better than I've conducted. And that sometimes happens.
It really does, yeah.
And sorry, but you speak.
No. Not, at least this is your own feeling. Let's not forget that either. I mean,
yes.
That could be Sakari's feeling, but we might, as an audience, just think, what do you mean? You were wonderful, Sakari. You were fantastic tonight. So it is so difficult, but it's just worth keeping in mind, yes.
So at what point, let's get to conducting. On your Wikipedia page, as we know, we don't write our Wikipedia pages, other people write them. It says from the age of 27, and I've done some maths, it's about 1996, conducting featured more heavily in your life. Why? First of all, if you were happily in your job, and when it did start to feature more heavily, did you go and see? I know you mentioned seeking lessons in Freiburg, but did you eventually have some lessons? A group of mentors or teachers? How did it first start for the journey from playing to conducting?
It was the ECYO that clicked it. It was the thing that I saw that conductors and orchestra could do together, and then a seed was, what do you say?
Planted, sown, yeah.
Exactly. And then actually also with members of the ECYO, we went to Aix-en-Provence Festival. And I remember that some of my British friends there offered to do chamber music, they realized very late that they had to do Stravinsky's octet in 2 days. And they just said, Thomas, because I was the only one in the room, can you study the score for tomorrow and then just beat us our way through this? And I literally loved studying that score, sat up at least one of the nights total. A friend at the academy here, she had to sing 3 songs from Pierrot Lunaire. I immediately said, I'll help you. It clicked in, and then something really began there. And I thought, this is me. I love digging into the depth of this. And I love focusing on sound and harmony and analyzing things, and then actually see it grow. And I can work with it and make a change. So that's really where it began. And then little by little, people just asked me to help them along. There was a modern ensemble that still is here in Copenhagen, Atelas. They often needed someone for the complicated works, as I'm sure you also know, to actually fix things quicker. They're so great ensemble, so they could do it themselves, but it would just take much longer. And of course, we do add something. Conductors to a performance, but there's a good reason why we were there to begin with. That's really how it all started. And then the music director with whom I actually tonight is going to celebrate his 70th birthday, he invited me to assist him on Paul Ruder's Kafka's Trial at the Opera House that was just opening in 2005, the new opera in Copenhagen. So I was very happy to do that. And it ended up me taking over the production because he was so busy with actually Elektra and other things as a music director. And that made a turning point in terms of actually connecting with managers and people hearing about me, as it is so important in our world, you know, that the whole manager part of what we do is important. And that started in 2005.
5 with the opera debut. I'm interested because it popped into my head, because you may well be the only other person I've ever asked this question to, and I like questions like this for my podcast. Did you ever conduct your colleagues? You did. Isn't it, or wasn't it, the hardest thing you've ever done? I mean, I'm conducting some of my I was assistant conductor and sub-principal second violin of the CBSO for 9 years.
You see.
And then I left and retired, and then became the associate conductor. And my next gig is in just under 2 weeks' time, conducting Shostakovich 8. And there are people in there who were in the orchestra before I joined in 1991. So yeah, I've conducted them, but nearly 290 times, and there have been people on that stage who I sat next to. I found it the hardest, and still do find it, to some respect, the hardest of all the orchestras I ever conduct.
Yeah. No, I agree. And then I thought the night before the first orchestral rehearsal of this opera, of course, I thought, how is this going to feel? Though some of them through some years before, have either agreed, if I've asked them, can we do some chamber music simply, and I was honest, I would love to learn by doing, and you are my friends, my colleagues, if you're going to do a chamber concert, what about this piece? And I put together some really good programs that made sense, that I would then work with them. And they agreed to that. And then other times they did ask me if I would do it for them. So I had some kind of experience with working with friends / colleagues, but nowhere near an important situation where you need to be on top of also a rehearsal schedule, with the whole opera. But what I found so beautiful was that the music that has taken me through my life in many difficult situations, also here took me through by actual total focus on what it was about. Music, the character, getting things done and getting to a result. So you can call it what you want, but it's some kind of religion that happens around you, and my senses just goes totally to the music. So within 2 or 3 minutes, I forgot that it was my colleagues. Then, of course, I'm reminded here and there when I actually have to talk with different colleagues that I knew maybe would have a little problem with me asking them to do something different. But that's also getting over it quick. But so I easily and quickly got over it. And now every year I work with them. I just did Electra and Valkyria last year. And honestly, it feels very, very natural now. And of course, there are also quite a lot of members in the orchestra that only knows me now as a conductor, not as a member of the orchestra.
I'm smiling because you were gesturing with sign language, almost like a bubble helmet round your head as you were thinking about the music. And dear listener, I was smiling and nodding because I feel exactly the same, because you surround yourself with the music. And the only time I ever think about, as Thomas said, is when I have to look up and give a cue to, Mark the third horn, who joined the orchestra before me, or Margaret the contrabassoonist, or, and that's when I realise where I am. But most of the time, yeah, I'm with you. I'm in that bubble. I'm in that zone. And I was also smiling at the end because every time I go back into the CBSO, there are more and more people who only know me as a conductor. They don't remember the extremely loud second violinist who used to sit on the second or third stand. They don't remember him at all. He's long gone. I noticed that your first two big jobs, and I think that I find this interesting because of the nature of these first two big jobs and radio orchestras. Your first job was for 3 years at principal conductor of Cork, or as it's otherwise known, the Norwegian Radio Orchestra. And then almost overlapping by a year, you then became the principal conductor of BBC National Orchestra of Wales. I'm going to come to those jump-ins again soon. But what about radio orchestras, especially the one I'm thinking about, Cardiff, in the fact that whilst you do standard repertoire, most of the stuff for the BBC is either brand new, the ink is still wet, or it's somewhat forgotten, or it's a piece that hasn't been played for 50 odd years and they want to dig out because they're doing a strand for Composer of the Week or whatever else. And with Cork, because I've also conducted them, they're the sort of orchestra, a little bit like the BBC Concert Orchestra and the WDR Funkhaus Orchestra, that do everything. Last time I conducted Cork was an opera gala, and we played everything from Lloyd Webber to, I think there was some Puccini on there. It's that very, very wide repertoire, isn't it, you get with these radio orchestras, that, you're learning new music every time you stand in front of them, aren't you? Even, in the 9 years between those two orchestras.
Yeah. No, and that's also what I loved about it. There was some of the best meetings I've had when it comes to repertoire was with BBC Now and Cork also, because they were exploring and wanted to develop the orchestra's repertoire, also because they're forced to it. That's part of their job as a broadcasting orchestra or organization. And the amount of music that I got to know there, that I might not have taken out as the first pick, because as I'm sure you also know yourself, that there's so much of the standard repertoire that you feel that you need to know to understand the oeuvre of any composer, really, and in a way is quite busy getting through, because I started, as you said earlier on, quite late, especially when you look at young conductors nowadays. It was I was just had a different focus when I was younger, and it just came very natural. And I knew also that I needed to be and wanted to be in a certain place as a human before I could become or would like to be a leader of, especially of a cultural organization, because I know the personalities. I know that personalities can be quite difficult to cope with artists, and if there are 80 of them or even more, then there needs to be a certain kind of balance and knowledge about yourself and life before you get up there. That was my feeling. So I wanted to fix a few things before I stepped on that podium.
Do you, again, a question I've never asked anybody else, I look back, I became assistant conductor of the CBSO in 2005 when I was 35. Having started conducting amateurs 5 or 6 years before that. And I ended up doing 22 years as a professional violinist before retiring. I sometimes look back and think, I wished I'd started sooner. But most of the time when I ask myself that question or think about that, I think, no, I don't think you'd be the conductor you are now without those 22 years of experience of seeing how conductors handle the difficult personalities in the orchestra that you just mentioned. I was a little bit older. I was 35. I'd played virtually everything there could be to play by then, and I knew it from the inside. I mean, your timeline is slightly shorter, but still it was a significant period. And as you said, you started conducting quite late. Have you ever asked yourself the same question? I wished I'd started sooner, and come to the same or a different answer?
I know that time in my life, I couldn't. I was there was many other things to fix on a personal level, and a certain kind of balance that I just instantly felt needs to be there, mainly for me to actually be a happy human being. But then, secondly, quite conscious about the examples that I've seen of conductors, leaders that have done something really unbelievable and something really horrible, something really I just couldn't understand it. And it would only point towards a human being not being in balance. And I just thought, it's not worth it for your own life. It's not worth it for the arts. So why? And I just wanted to make sure that I was not another example of that. So no, I wouldn't have done it differently. The only thing I would say would have been nice, and that's why I work so much for reaching out to kids that doesn't have the possibilities that I had. The only thing I would have wished was maybe to live in a little bit of a bigger city where touring orchestras, or even where there would have been a symphony orchestra, where I would have met or seen a conductor, because I honestly think that it would have caught my interests maybe a little earlier if I actually could mirror myself in a conductor. And the city I grew up in was not like that. And it doesn't have to be conductors in all smaller cities. That's not what I mean.
Yeah.
But it's important for me that there's a touring theater company, that there is, chamber music as the least. Then great if there's a big theater, a house company, an opera company, symphony orchestra, or a good music school.
Jump-ins, I think they're very important. I think they're ways that we can be thrust in front of an orchestra at a very late notice. Would your advice be to take them if possible? Were they always successful? I mean, obviously we know that the jump-in with the BBC Now and the one with the RSNO ended up being very successful, because you ended up having long-term relationships with them. But what are your thoughts on jump-ins for when if a young conductor were to ring you up and say, should I do this? I mean, obviously it's very situation specific, but what would be your thoughts?
My thoughts would definitely be, again, what was important for myself, to have good connection with my own feelings in general about my capacity but my how am I as a leader? Would that fit in the experience I have now to go to that orchestra? In terms of the repertoire, if you can't change it, is it really clever to fly to Germany and do a Brahms symphony, even if you've just done it once? So yes, as you say, it's very based on the actual situation. But that said, one push that was really important for me was a situation where I actually asked for half an hour's can I think? And that was my manager's sat next to the manager of the opera in Stuttgart. She was down there on another occasion, and they started talking about a conductor for Tosca.
Mm.
She immediately thought of me because coming from the opera world and being so passionate about voices, and so she rang me when she got back to the hotel room and presented me with the idea. It's no firm invitation, but would you be interested? And then I said, give me half an hour. I don't think so. I've never done it, but I know it incredibly well. I've played it. I don't know how many hundreds times. And I'm very, I'm very fortunate to remember tunes, harmonies, structures very well. So it just takes me very little time to look through this score, and I can kind of guess how it looks because it's here more or less. That's very fortunate. I could not sit down and play it on the piano, but so that was the reason why actually I ended up saying yes. Okay, let's go for it. And it ended up being a really important debut. So they wanted me to do also Luisa Miller the year after, another Tosca round on the third year, and so I'm very glad that I said yes to doing that. But that's the only time for jump in. It was not a real jump in, but it was quite immediate that they needed a conductor. It was like 2 or 3 weeks ahead. Other than that, I think my advice would be that have a really good feeling of what you can do at the moment. If you know that you are maybe not the best person yourself to answer that question, then seek advice and go through it with some experienced conductors, because it is kind of, well, it is important not to burn your bridges. But maybe even more important, to damage yourself by an experience that is maybe a little too high off the cliff. There will be another situation where they will ask, don't worry.
I agree so much with, especially those last couple of sentiments. I'm thinking of a particular jump in I was asked to do. It was less than 24 hours notice. With an orchestra I already had a relationship with, but not particularly. I was doing sort of schools, families, other sort of concerts with them. But they asked me, would I come and do this? And just the time constraints alone. And with music, I either didn't know because it was brand new, or I hadn't seen for 10 years. And it was one of those times I reluctantly, but now look back on it, thankfully said, no, I can't do it. Because I think I'd have burnt my bridges with an orchestra I still get invited to and I still enjoy working with, because I'd have been underprepared and I would have not been in the right place. I think there are other jump-ins I've been asked for, could you do these 3 pieces? And I go, yeah, don't even have to look at the score. I'd play them, know them, conducted them loads. Fine, yeah, I'm there. I'm with you in half an hour. But that was just one of those. It felt a bridge too far. And I'm glad I turned it down. I think, situations.
And Michael, I can think of many of our colleagues that I adore, that I know through themselves, but also through some of their colleagues or friends that have told me, not that they shouldn't have told me, but I know that they don't need more preparation time than on the train or in the airplane to prepare themselves even for a piece that they maybe haven't done for 20 years, or because they know that they are so quick in the moment. They have so much experience, so they can make it work. And even in the first rehearsal, and then they would pick up second and third rehearsal, and the concert would, for even themselves, feels as if they've known this piece for a long time. So we all very, very, very different,
Well, there is an 11th question you don't know about yet before the 10 questions, which is all about score prep. And so we'll come to that in a minute. I want to linger on your 2 current orchestras. The first one being RSNO. And if you compare that to Cork and with BBC Now, you became principal guest in in 2012 and had that role for 6 years before becoming the music director. Do you feel that that long-term relationship where you go to them once or twice a year before becoming music director has helped you become the music director, as opposed to the other ones where maybe you only went once or twice before as a guest and then were immediately asked to go to the big job?
In this case, yes, I know the world, not only within music, also sometimes functions in a different way. We are in a relationship, or we are in a time in our life. If it's an organism, an orchestra, or if it's human beings in between, I just need a change now.
Yeah.
And if it can be as great a relationship or even a wonderful house with a great view, but I just need a change now because there can be many different reasons that we need to just have a different view on things.
Mm.
And in this case, it was we just always functioned so well together, and we couldn't see why it should end here.
Mm.
In fact, we wanted it to develop to something bigger. So it was from being engaged to really
to marriage. Yeah.
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 And it's a little bit the same here. I start in Minnesota next week. I fly. I start rehearsals as music director over there, and we'll have a 5-year contract. And it was just a wonderful first meeting, and I can't wait for the journey that I'm going to have with a new ensemble. Though I'm very aware that it's not just swapping out a different partner, and simply having a new relationship that would change everything. It's just a great deep relationship between two ensembles at the same time. I'm sure that's possible, and it would give a good balance in different working terms. And as you know, an orchestra they have very different energies, and you can reach different things at certain points in their life and in my life. So it's really exciting.
Well, toi for your first week as music director. I did have a look. Well, is your first week the Alpine Symphony? So you start with something nice and small, nothing too big.
Then the second piece is Mozart's oboe concerto, so that's nice and small.
Yeah. We mentioned it earlier on, and specifically about those lucky conductors who can learn a score on a train or on a plane. But how do you go about learning a score? You said that you happily can listen to it with your own inner ear. Do you start big and go in smaller and smaller to the details? Do you then maybe start at page 1 and work your way through? And there are plenty of geeks who listen to this podcast who want to know, are you a scribbler or not a scribbler? Are you a red, blue, black, or just a light 3B? How do you go about learning your scores, Thomas?
I honestly, of course, when I was young, also to speed things up and to learn from experience, I, of course, listened a lot to music. I also listened while studying the scores. I get more and more away from that now. I still find it incredibly interesting and very, very difficult to keep my hands off all recordings, because it's so interesting how orchestras, conductors, instrumentalists, singers have done it over the years, and it would be stupid not to learn from it, especially when it's right there. I don't need to walk down to the library. So I get incredibly inspired by that. But I also feel that both my age, I'm born in '69, and there's so much that's settled musically in me. So it's not going to color my interpretation majorly if I listen the day before rehearsal to a recording. Because it's already there somehow by that time. And that's what I sometimes do, just to get inspired. Oh, that's interesting. That kind of character or that tempo really is very, very different of what I thought. What does that bring, or what does that take away in my view, or whatever, if I have time for it. And when it comes to the other question, I used to write thoughts, articulations, characters, entrances, even sequences, very, very clear down in the score. The only thing I do now is very important comments that I've had from early experiences in terms of intonation, and often it's that chord and it's the third in that. For some reason, it's the way it's written, it's tricky, whatever. Just to remind myself. But but the actual phrasing, this is a 4-bar phrase, 3-bar phrase, that I make very clear to myself because I like to connect as much as I can with the orchestra. And I know that my eyes would very quickly find the end of the 4-bar phrase, whatever, if it's there.
Mm.
If I have to look too much for it, then I'm not sure I always can find it. So, and my eyes are getting a little trickier now. So that's what I keep to, and important entrances. I actually get a better memory the older I get. So I do remember who plays in that chord. I don't need to specify that with a pencil. That would just distract the important bit, which is maybe the entrance or even just the contact to the musician. So that's where I am now.
I mean, over 130 odd episodes, everybody does it differently, as you can well imagine. As you know, if you've ever looked at another conductor's score, what's interesting is we're maybe a year apart. I'm at the moment, my eyes are terrible. I can either see the score and not the players' faces, or I can put my glasses on and I can see the players' faces and not the score, and maybe varifocals as a way forward. Or bigger scores. I mean, my little pocket scores are now, they're being retired. I'm doing Nielsen.
I can see them behind you.
Yeah, that's where they're staying now. I've just been asked to conduct Nielsen's Fourth Symphony in 2024 in June, and I've used a pocket score for my entire career. The 9 or 10 times I've conducted it, no longer. I've had to buy a big one. Eyes cannot see it.
No,
yeah.
I understand.
And I'm a red, blue, and black person, so I still write lots of things in. But even then, I can't see it on a pocket score. These things need to change. Are you a young conductor, thirsty for knowledge and wanting to discover more about the world of conducting? If you are, then my Patreon page is there for you. I'm constantly posting new content there based on my experiences as a conductor and an ex-orchestral player. And I offer you the chance to ask me any question any time of the day. For instance, you might like to ask me how to mark up a score, as we've just been discussing. When you subscribe, you will gain access to interviews, video posts, tour diaries, articles, and much more. If you pay for the whole year, then you will gain a 10% discount, and if you are a student, contact me directly and there will be a further discount. All of this can be found at patreon.com/a mic on the podium, and from just £5 a month you can gain access to this ever-growing resource on conductors and conducting. That's patreon.com. Details and links to the page are in the show notes attached to this episode. Now, the all-important 10 questions with my guest, Thomas Søndergård. Thomas, it's time for the 10 questions. And I always start with the same 2 lumped as 1. What sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you hate?
I love the sound of the sea, actually. I just love that. There's something very calming, or just water, I should say. You might move to a different house, and the first thing I think of is that I would love to have a little fountain. And already now I'm trying to find that fountain because the sound of water is just so beautiful.
And the sound you don't like?
There's nothing that can disturb the way I feel as stressful noises like traffic and stressful people that it can be a bell on a bike, and there are loads of bikes here in Denmark, or it can be a horn in a car. The other day I got so stressful by someone that actually used his horn in the car, so I nearly went into a pedestrian because I looked at him and I got so stressed about the sound. So I've learned not to react on that, but I absolutely hate that kind of noise.
Something to take you out of your attention and reverie.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming you're either looked at and bought, or you are in the position of trying to look for a house in near Minnesota. Is it a fountain in the garden, or are you going to try and look for somewhere near running water?
No, it's actually in Sweden. My husband is a singer. He's a baritone. and he is from Sweden. And we've now lived in Denmark together for 19 years, and we would like to explore something new. And I love Sweden, and I love Swedish people, and Malmö, just on the other side of the bridge here from Copenhagen, is a beautiful town, and we found a house there. We need to stay here as much as I would love to move closer to Minnesota, or for that reason, even to Scotland, where I've been with the RSNO for many years. It's just like this, and you know that. His career, he's a freelancer as well, is based on contacts around this region, Sweden and Denmark. And to suddenly move that to Scotland or to America is impossible. And also, I've got my wonderful mother who turns 80 in a few months, and I'd like to be with her last year here, and so it's easy for me to see her. So the fountain is going to be, hopefully, you may cross your fingers, because it's in these days, it will be or not.
Yeah.
In Sweden.
Number 3, if you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
I would do something that calms me down, and there's nothing better for me than taking the time, if it's walking or on a bike or in a beautiful train ride, go somewhere, actually, yeah, traveling, even if I do that so much, but it would need to go to a place where there's a beautiful setting, where there's hopefully a spa, treatments, wonderful food. Doesn't have to be Michelin star food, but just really nice food, preferably seafood. Take my wonderful husband there, and just spend those 24 hours feeding the senses. And actually, I would love to bring a little bit of music, just in case I miss Brahms, which is the first one that comes to me. I'll listen to a little bit of Brahms, chamber music. His sonata for violin, his first sonata, is one of my favorite pieces. I'll just listen a little bit to that. Maybe bring a book. So that would be my absolute preferred 24 hours.
It's a way of winding down. It's a way of turning the soundtrack off that's in our heads all of the time from the music we're studying or conducting or performing. And as you've said, if the best way of changing the soundtrack is to put on one of Brahms's violin sonatas, what a brilliant way of changing the soundtrack, you know.
Yeah. So it's avoiding necessarily music. It's not necessarily that. But maybe silence, and then so I can hear the water.
Can you name your favorite conductor or conductors of yesteryear?
There's just no doubt that the conductor that made the biggest impact on me, both when I played, but also inspiration from watching his concerts live, but still when I look online, it's Claudio Abbado. I did go quite a lot to Berlin when I studied in Freiburg, and I was fortunate to hear some of his concerts there. Among them, I'll never forget a Tchaikovsky 4, where Schellenberger, the previous principal oboe, played, and it just stands as a very, very clear memory. And also, I've seen Abbado work again with the youth orchestras, with the Berlin Phil, and even if I know that, and it's like that for all of us, we can never be liked by everybody. I'm not sure how I would feel if I had to work with him every day, from what I've heard. But then again, I choose just to go on my own experiences from working with him. Then I think your next question is the now living conductor.
Exactly. Right? Yes, it is. It is the one that some conductors have found harder. Can you name one or more than one?
I adore the depth, the focus, the music making, the overview, the non-flirting for what conducting shouldn't be about, with Kirill Petrenko. I absolutely would love to play for him.
Me too.
Yeah. I think there's such an honest. I think I see and hear honesty in his musicianship, and that's what I'm aiming for myself. That there's no other thing than the core of the music there. So him, and also I must say, an artist like Tugan Sokiev, which is a completely different conductor. I've met him a few times. We had the same manager at some point, and I was also in Toulouse when he was there, and I think he still has a flat there, but I'm not sure. But he was in town, and we had a good talk, and so both as a human and as an artist, I admire him.
Kirill Petrenko is almost the embodiment of a line I've used with some of my conducting students. You know, don't be caught up in what being a conductor in inverted commas means, you know, what some people think it means, turning left on an aeroplane, always being ferried around in a limousine, etc., etc., etc. Try to be the best musician who also happens to be a conductor. You know, it's all about being the best musician, and I think he embodies it. He doesn't seem at all interested in all of the other stuff. You know, he just wants to be the best musician and make his orchestras play the music as honestly and as heartfelt way as possible. And yeah, that's why I'd love to play for him.
Yeah, yet I don't know because I've never met him. But that's the kind of vibes I get from seeing him work, and not only that, but also seeing the musicians' eyes and interest in communicating with him. So so far, yeah, that's very wonderful that there's someone like him getting a major position. That's lovely.
What is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
So the hardest work, I would say, for many reasons, Valkyrie. The pure length of it, the overview that you as a conductor needs to have, both when it comes to actually preparing the orchestra, that also you need to make sure that even if there's a changing team, which there are in opera houses, that it's covered everything.
Yeah.
Not least that you don't exhaust the singers and that you carry them through. So that's a part of the job as a conductor. It's just not just the actual conducting piece. It's dealing with that piece as it comes and as it's created. Maybe Electra, which I did also last year, is just complex in a different way. But when you say actually sitting at the desk and understanding the piece and make it easy for the musicians to get to the core of what I read that the composer must have meant, is Ligeti's violin concerto. I did that with Bayerischer Rundfunk, Bavarian Radio Orchestra, just before my summer holiday. But I was fortunate to have a great ensemble as they are, but also to have Hadelich, Augustin Hadelich, as a soloist, a very, very serious musician that knows this piece very, very well. So it actually ended up being a great, great experience, but that's among the hardest I've done in terms of really digging into the meaning of the piece, making it as easy for the musicians as possible, and for it to become an understandable piece, and hopefully a piece that the audience will embrace.
Three brilliant choices. I mean, dear listener, the second act of Die Walküre is 1 hour, 40 minutes. I mean, just going through that, you know, in a physical and trying to find the span or the arch, the architecture for 1 hour, 40 minutes of continual conducting music making is incredibly difficult.
And you're just talking about the performance.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Which is in itself really, really a challenge, you know, to just your mindset focused. But I'm also talking about the whole journey just to get to the performances of a major piece like that.
When you've got two casts or double casted, or you've got cast changes, and Absolutely. The whole journey is amazing. I'm going to tell you very briefly my Ligeti Violin Concerto story, which makes every time anybody mentions that piece, I get a shiver down my back, like my blood runs cold. We were doing it in Birmingham when I was sitting number 5 that week, and I think there are 4 second violin parts, and I was sitting number 5. And Simon Rattle was conducting, and it was the second concert that week, and I turned up to work about half an hour earlier, thinking, well, I wonder whether we'll be needed for the rehearsal. And the orchestra manager walked out and said, oh, I'm glad you're here. You're on. Could you go and you're on the rehearsal is only the Ligeti, and Simon's going to do the bits that you need to know. And I'd never seen the part, and I walked out there and opened up the first movement and thought, oh, this will be okay. And is it the second movement where you actually open out this? It's sort of 4 pages of nothing but scales. And I just looked at that, and it was just horrendous.
How did it go?
I got away with it. I got away with it. And Simon smiled at me at the end as if to say, yeah, you got away with that. It's okay. I mean, yeah, my God. Yeah, frightening.
For next time, just when that name appears on the schedule, just maybe pick up the music a little earlier.
Yeah, I learned that lesson. Yeah, I started looking at pieces I knew I wasn't going to be in, just in case I might be in it one day. Absolutely true. Number 7, when traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
I would like to be good and say my trainers and my jockeying outfit. And I hope at some point that will be the answer to you. I still happen to forget it. I really don't know why, because I should be doing a little bit more of that in any gym, or for that sake, in a park, in a beautiful park. But it's close to that, I think, the answer. It's just important for me to have, I can forget the baton, even if I think more and more that it's actually quite important for many reasons to use it. But I think actually a pair of good shoes is really important, both when it comes to standing up as we do in rehearsals, but also to feel that you look good or look decent when you either have of course, I've never actually so far forgot my concert dresses, but also I just like to have a good pair of shoes. After all, these feet will carry us for many years, and I try to stand up a lot when I conduct, because I just find that my own energy with the orchestra is different from sitting down, and at some point I would have to sit down if I'm lucky enough to get old. Old enough. Yeah.
It was advice given to me early on by John Wilson when he found out I was conducting. He said, make sure your shoes are always comfortable. There's nothing worse than conducting with, uncomfortable shoes on. And I've always made that. And as you said, you need they're things that you wear so often. If you can feel comfortable, and it's something you can wear in the concert or in a reception afterwards with, especially when you're in Minnesota, you're going to be meeting an awful lot of people, fundraising and philanthropists and all of that. No, it's a very, very good answer. And it's an answer I'm not sure I've had for a very long time.
What are the answers most?
Oh, I have yoga mats, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. Jogging shoes does come up a lot. People who do go and jog. I've never been a jogger. But yes, I've had some weird and wonderful answers. Honestly, I have. What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
Traveling.
The most often given answer, and it's as simple as one word: traveling. Yeah.
If I could do less of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, I could throw that back at you and say, says the man who has 2 jobs, one in Minnesota, one in Glasgow, and who lives in Copenhagen. But, it is exactly, it's what the job requires. If you fall in love with an orchestra the other side of the Atlantic or either side of the Atlantic, that's what you do, because we love working with orchestras we love.
Yeah. And it's partly the time, it's partly the stress, it's partly the vibration in the airport, people that
Yeah.
think for them, they've paid enough money to get first in the queue, and all that energy, instead of just shoulders down, in a week you will forget if you were number 30 or number one on the plane. What does it matter? It's all that energy uh, that I would love to avoid. So I've just taken decisions now just to relax with it, but of course I do understand conductors that is happy to take a position in their hometown, because it really limits, and also not least when we think about the pollution. So that there are other things I know that I should maybe think of as being more serious when it comes to our planet. But I'm not happy about the pollution bit of it.
And I'm with you on the energy in the airports. Oh, I hate it. I really do. The sort of elbowing or the self entitlement. Well, I've paid this. I can do what I like. I hate it. Hate it. Number 9, again, real or fantasy. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt or have liked to have attempted?
Architect.
Oh, brilliant. Same as me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same answer I gave in episode 1 and episode 50. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it really, really interests me how buildings are made and for what reason, and the choices, the everything from history to newer buildings. I can sit for hours and see programs on buildings that are changed, or and my fantasy just goes, if I had an unlimited amount of money or time to create my own space and how it would look, and I find it endlessly inspiring.
Have you thought, as I have, because I've asked this question 140 times and a few people have said architect, it is very similar to what we do in a very broad sense, in the fact that we're looking at the overall architecture of it, how it looks on the outside, the span, the arch, the shape, but also as architects are involved in where the fire ducts go, where the wiring goes, what sort of latch goes on the windows, whether the door opens in or out, i.e. the details, as we would do looking at a score. We're not just looking at the overall picture of the score, we're looking at the details, the bowings, when the wind players breathe. They are very similar sort of outlooks.
And even taking it longer, what kind of atmosphere would this room have? What kind of textures would I love to touch with? Where should my feet walk on wood or concrete?
Yeah.
How's the light entering the room? Everything from what you put into it as well. So it's maybe not only architecture, but also design and choice of materials.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, Thomas, if the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
There can only be one answer to that. My wonderful husband, Andreas, is a fantastic chef. And for him to cook for me is among my favorite things. I mean, the amount of times that I've sat with a score and he comes in and gives me a hug and say, food is ready. And he's not told me what it is. And then we go out and have the most wonderful dinner. So that would have to be the answer.
And would you drink wine with that, beer with that, water with that? What would you both normally be drinking with your home-cooked husband's meal?
My choice would be a Bordeaux, and Andreas's would be different. He's not so much into red wine, but what we can agree on is certainly a good bottle of champagne. So why don't we start there?
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant choice. And I love the fact that it's a non-specific answer, but it's definitely with a specific person and with a bottle of champagne, which sounds like the perfect thing to do. And it's been a perfect hour. I've loved chatting with you, Thomas. And I hope whether I ever end up in Minnesota, I may well be I am in Glasgow again in November, and maybe in Copenhagen, we can sit down over a glass of champagne and have another chat. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. And if I come to Birmingham, I assume you still live there? Or?
I do.
Yeah. Then let's meet and have a glass, maybe even something to eat. It's been wonderful to be here on your program.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time I chat with a conductor who was born in Cyprus, but he spent most of his life living here in the United Kingdom. He started his musical career as a pianist, going on to direct orchestras from the keyboard. Most significantly, in 1998 he founded his own professional orchestra, which he is still the music director of today, the Oxford Philharmonic Orchestra. But until then, bye-bye.